Hello and a warm welcome to our live event today with myself, Ashok Gupta, the founder and CEO of the Gupta program. So I'm really delighted that you've spent your time today coming onto our live event where we're going to be talking about the Trauma-Protection Matrix, which is our most ambitious project yet to really look at mapping our childhood experiences right through to how that then impacts on our nervous system, our immune system, and then physical symptoms, and creating an entire matrix, an entire map of how this all fits together. And so as we go through today's presentation, I hope that some light bulb moments will occur for you, that you'll have those ahas of, this is what I've been experiencing. And for me, personal development is all about self-awareness. It's all about becoming more and more aware of that which is unconscious within us, putting the spotlight on it and bringing it to conscious awareness. And that's what we'll be covering in today's live session. And just to give a bit of background to what we'll be covering today. So as you know, or many of you know, my background is that I suffered from a chronic health condition many years ago. I suffered from chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME, in the late 90s. And it's been a 25-year journey from healing and recovering myself, setting up a clinic to treat others, and then setting up the well-known neuroplasticity program, the Gupta program. And then since then, we've published 7 clinical studies, 6 of which have been independent, to show that this type of approach really can support people with chronic health conditions. And we've spent these 25, 30 years really understanding the psycho-neuro-immunological basis for chronic health conditions, what it's at the root cause. Because what's so interesting is that Kaiser Permanente did actually a study. They looked at people who'd been through trauma. And they found that those who'd experienced trauma were twice as likely to get an inflammatory condition later in life, or get these kind of persistent health symptoms, which were very difficult to have a root cause to. And so therefore, this is affecting more and more people in the population, those common symptoms of fatigue, pain, deep exhaustion, some immune symptoms like sore throats, and difficulty thinking, concentrating. All of these are symptoms we now see more and more in the population. And we believe it's down to a dysregulated nervous system that may be coming also at its roots from past experiences. Now, as we go through today's presentation, what's really important is that you recognize this is for informational purposes only. This is not a substitute for medical diagnosis or treatment or working with a therapist. This is just for information. And if at any point you notice that some of the content that we go through actually might be creating some emotions within you, maybe triggering little experiences within you, it's really important that you then perhaps pause watching, ground yourself with some deep breaths, and reach out to someone that can support you. And so if you feel that you might be easily triggered by talking about experiences from our past, then it's best that you don't necessarily watch this, but perhaps take some of the key information from someone else, perhaps one of our clinicians and coaches who can guide you through this kind of content. So I just want to put that warning there, that if you know that you have past trauma, that this is very much near the surface, it might be better to work with one of our coaches versus watching an experience like this. Okay. And of course, we'd love for you to like and share this particular video. Please do subscribe to our channel so that you can benefit from more of the type of content that we'll be sharing today. And once again, this is such important content. I was reflecting on this today, and actually the content we're going to go through is relevant to everybody on this planet, because even if someone hasn't experienced trauma in their past, they certainly have experiences which may be mild, but still impact on their personality traits, their parts, their way of interacting with others. So the content that we go through is really, I think, uniquely applicable to every situation, every person, and these influences still make a difference. Okay, so let's jump in. And as you know, we're going to be having this half an hour live event, and then what we're going to do is jump on Zoom for a Q&A afterwards, and our team will share the Zoom link so you can have an interactive Q&A with myself and my team, and that then deepens the knowledge that we're going through. Okay, so in terms of our starting point, we're going to be talking about how our early relational stress and developmental stress imprints on the brain. And often these are called ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And what that means is when we go through experiences, certain emotions come up. And an emotion is designed to give us a message or a warning. So emotions aren't bad. They are simply messages. They help us to navigate the world around us. Yeah? And so when an emotion comes up, it's designed to give us a message, to then be processed. So we've understood its message and then released. Yeah? So it's the coming and going of emotions. They're not designed to get stuck or linger. But when an emotion sometimes comes along, if it's quite intense, a child may not have the resources to deal with that emotion. It's perhaps too scary, too intense. Yeah? And that emotion may come from a wide variety of different experiences. So along a scale, it can be anything from mild neglect to moderate, to then moving on to certain types of abuse or bullying, right through to full-blown traumatic experiences. It can be anywhere along that scale. And that might be how a child interacts with a parent or caregiver or a sibling. It might be certain traumatic experiences that they go through. It can be where they've had too much responsibilities as a child, or there have been certain experiences the mother or father have gone through that they've had to then support, which can all develop and leave these imprints in the brain. And we often say that there are two brain structures that we talk about a lot, the amygdala and the insular cortex. And these two brain structures, we believe that the baseline calibration of those structures occurs through various different experiences, from the birthing experiences, the first 5 years of life, when our brain is very malleable. It's changing a lot, it's learning a lot, and the imprints are deeper in the first 5 to 10 years. And that emotional calibration then impacts on us for the rest of our lives. But the good news is that, first of all, our genes are not our destiny, but also our experiences are not our destiny. Our traumas are not our destiny. Our past is not our destiny. But through the power of neuroplasticity, we can retrain the brain out of these past experiences or these residues of memories from our past, and actually retrain and reframe the way that we then interact with people in the present day as adults. And some would say that's the foundational aspect of our personal growth and development, is letting go of that which no longer serves us, releasing those trapped emotions, and recognizing that experiences from the past do not have to determine our current present day interactions. And these emotions traditionally have been seen in a psychological perspective. And, you know, when you go to hospital, there's a separate psychology department over here, a separate immunology department over here, etc. But the way we look at it here at the Gupta program is that there's one system, one protective system, and therefore it can't be looked at in isolation. And therefore, emotions aren't just single abstract events in the brain, but they're coordinated physiological programs that involve not only brain circuits, but hormones, the immune system, our behaviors, and physiological experiences. Like when we feel anxious, is that just a thought in the brain? No, our muscles can tighten up. We get tightness in the chest, right? There are a whole cascade of different physiological responses, and they can also then lead on to physical symptoms as well and physical conditions. All right. Okay, so let's dive in to the content that we're going to cover today. And I hope you're ready to take this exciting journey with me today. And once again, please do share this with others. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And I think the first thing that I want to talk about is, once again, our childhood experiences. And as you know, we often use puppets to represent the different parts of our personality. Now, it used to be thought we're one person, but actually, imagine that we are made up of different parts that play different roles, different protective roles. Yeah, it's a bit like if somebody says, I've just had a slice of chocolate cake and I feel like another slice. There'll be one part of us that says, don't have an extra slice of chocolate cake. You've had enough. And there'll be another part that says, actually, I really want that second slice. So you can see there are different parts of us that want different things. They both want what is best for us, but they have different agendas and different targets for that. And often our anxiety, our depressions, our stress is because we have these different parts living within us who want different things. And that creates this disintegration and this internal stress. And that's what we'll be addressing today. So one part of it is we often call Kyle, the inner child. Yeah, so let me bring up Kyle, the inner child. Okay, so Kyle, the inner child, is essentially this part of us that goes through those childhood experiences, but then perhaps holds on to some of those experiences. So an experience is supposed to be bringing up an emotion, we let that go, and then there's no imprint. But if an experience is too traumatic, too difficult for Kyle, then she comes up with a strategy, which is let me deal with this emotion later in life. And that emotion could be fear, it could be anxiety, it could be anger, shame, guilt, panic, a whole host of different emotions that could be occurring. Right? And then as those emotions are occurring, there are certain aspects of safety for that child, right? So as those emotions become repressed, there can be various reasons why those emotions are actually being generated and not being processed. And here are some of these ones here. So it can be safety. Yeah? Is that child experiencing a lack of safety? And that's obviously the larger one that we experience. Is it a lack of emotional attunement? Number 2 there. That means, is the child feeling like the parent or caregiver is not attuned to their needs, not really listening to how they're feeling emotionally? A third might be emotional expression, and so on and so on. And we'll come back to these 8 core needs. Now, if the child feels that some of those needs are not being addressed, then sometimes what the child can then do is look at, well, I don't want to feel those emotions. So let's say these emotions have now got stuck within that child. They don't want to feel those emotions anymore. So one of the first strategies a child comes up with or then lingers on as an adult is what we call distracting or numbing. We don't want to feel those raw emotions. They're painful. Yeah? They've become repressed within us. And so one strategy that the child comes up with is this distractor or numbing strategy, which is let me not feel that experience. And that's where we may go into, as an adult, drugs or alcohol, some kind of addiction that then soothes the pain, soothes that feeling within us. Or it could be excessive shopping, excessive working, anything that distracts us and numbs us from feeling that pain is a protection strategy. And you can see there, that little red puppet is what we call the cake monster. It's the part of us that wants us to go off and have pleasurable, short-term pleasurable experiences to numb us from that pain. Now, the next layer here is actually what we call the strategies. So let's say we have these emotions within us and we don't want those emotions to be triggered, like fear or anger or guilt or sadness. And we learn as a child that actually, if we employ certain traits like achieving things, if we have certain traits that are rescuing and helping others, or we people please, etc., then we can protect ourselves from those emotions being re-triggered. And those parts then start developing within us. All right, so just bringing up the next slide here, which is these particular parts start developing a strategy. So on the top left, we have the approval seeker or people pleaser. Let me not express how I feel about something because someone may get upset. So I will push down how I truly feel and only say things that please others. The inner critic, let me put myself down and criticize myself before someone else does, because that's a protective strategy. The victim, if I feel like I've been wronged and I play the victim, then people will show me love and attention and support rather than putting me down. And at the bottom, the helper or rescuer. Sometimes that child learns, if I help and rescue others, I'm the good little boy or the good little girl. And that protects me from people treating me badly. That becomes a learnt response. We have the achiever. If I achieve, yeah, do you ever have that experience that as a child, if you did well at school, you would get approval, perhaps from the teacher or a parent. And therefore, that meant that became your way of getting approval, being supported. Another one being the safety seeker, hypervigilance. You know, I'm in an unsafe place. And finally, the perfectionist. If I do things perfectly, then people can't put me down. That protects me from my core emotions and wounds being re-triggered. Kyle's wounds being re-triggered. Now, What happens then in our model is some of these layers here, this outer layer that you can see, that in itself becomes a challenge to the system. Because if we're overachieving to prove ourselves and prove that we're good enough and get love and attention, we start pushing beyond our body's limits. We start overworking, over pushing through. As an example, that combines with perfectionism, which means we can never be relaxed, because can you actually ever do anything perfectly? The approval seeker or people pleasing. If we don't speak our mind, those emotions become repressed within us. And that magnifies the impact on our nervous system. So our nervous system stays tight and dysregulated. So all of these strategies, and there are many more, these are just an example, these strategies themselves can be the challenge. And then in our model, what then happens is that a virus then comes along, or a bacterial infection, whilst we are pushing. And normally our immune system kicks in, it fights off the virus or the bacteria, the food infection, it could be mold, it could be anything, toxins. It fights it off by triggering the immune system and then brings the body back to normal, back to baseline. But if we've had these strategies pushing, then what happens is this threatens our physical survival. It's like having flu and then deciding to run a marathon with flu. That would threaten your very survival. It would threaten your immune system's ability to fight off that virus. And so our protective systems, the nervous system and immune system, they start panicking because they think this threat has come on, this physiological threat, like a virus or bacteria, but this person is engaging in behaviors that actually compromise our ability to fight off that infection. What should we do? Let's over-trigger the immune system and nervous system. So these protector parts come up to over-defend the system, which then causes a lot of downstream symptoms. And those downstream symptoms themselves become a problem. And we'll be talking about, when we go into the trauma protection matrix, which systems get triggered in which particular personality traits. So we're about to come into the matrix now. Sounds very ominous, doesn't it? But yes, we're going to describe this matrix. And so once again, these protector parts come in. So if I show you this, this next slide here, this is where we then have a protector. And this protector, which we've got a puppet as the policeman, is now policing the system. And not only is it triggering the immune system and nervous system in an overreactive way, but anytime we engage in achiever activities, being the perfectionist, criticizing ourselves, it sees those behaviors as threats, and so it starts over-triggering even more. And that's where an acute problem turns into a chronic problem. Have you ever wondered, how does sadness turn into depression? How does COVID turn into long COVID? How does some kind of normal infection turn into a post-viral condition? How does an exposure to mold turn into mold illness? This is all in our model due to the fact that we have conditioning events in the amygdala and insula. The brain now learns to overprotect continuously, and it forms a vicious cycle. So the next stage of this vicious cycle here is when we then go into worrying. We start worrying about our symptoms, hypervigilance and how the body's feeling, which then fuels the brain even more that we are in danger. And that's where, once again, the acute condition turns into a feedback loop and creates a chronic condition, gut issues, the gut-brain axis. So the gut itself is feeding back loads of this information back to the brain. Okay? So this is our model of how and why chronic conditions are so difficult to treat, because as you can see, there's multiple layers going in here, from the trauma that the inner child, Kyle, the inner child, experienced, and those residues of those memories, those emotions get trapped in the physical body. At the somatic level, then we have distraction and numbing away from that pain. We then come up with strategies to offset those inner traumatic experiences and memories to stop them being re-triggered as protection. But those strategies now become the very problem, which then triggers an immune system and nervous system to over-respond and defend against those very strategies. And then another layer comes along where we start becoming hypervigilant on those symptoms, which then fuels further defense. And once this system is set up, that can then cause ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, mold illness, long COVID. All of these things are when the whole system gets stuck. All right. So let me describe now what I think is new about this model that we're going to go through is looking at these various aspects of core needs of the child, the safety, emotional attunement, emotional expression, how can we now connect these to what may be going on in our model? And this is where we're going into the traumatic memory matrix here. So let's start off with missing need of safety and protection. And that's the one that we obviously hear a lot about. And this can be this feeling that the world is unpredictable. I'm not safe. I'm going to be abandoned. And this is a feeling that often is associated, once again, with trauma. That feeling that we're not being supported, we're not being looked after. Okay. And so what can be the emotional pattern that then occurs as a result of that? There can be fear and hypervigilance, where we have a bodily dissociation because it's not safe to feel into our body. So there can be this bodily dissociation. Now, what kind of life strategies may occur as a result of this feeling that the world is unpredictable? I'm not safe. I'm going to be abandoned. Well, the brain can come up with an interesting strategy, which is safety seeking, constantly being hypervigilant about the environment around us, about the interactions, and it can then feel like everything is dangerous. I need to be hypervigilant. I need to control my environment. I need to plan out everything. Yeah? So this strategy is once again an opportunity to offset those core wounds, those feelings that I'm going to be abandoned, because these are survival instincts. Yeah. The next one is then our attachment style. And those attachment styles can be then an anxious attachment style. So we're not going to go deep into the attachment styles. That's for another day. And so those attachment styles are anxious. They can be fearful avoidance, feeling like if the world's unsafe, relationships are unsafe. So I'll avoid being in those types of experiences. And once again, being hypervigilant in those. Then the next column there, the nervous and immune system. As a result of this feeling that the world is a dangerous place, we then can have this sympathetic activation bias, and we reduce vagal flexibility. Now, what that means is our stress and nervous system then gets over-triggered continuously. We have this sympathetic activation of our stress system. Yeah? We're constantly in a siege mentality. The world is unsafe. The world's unpredictable. And therefore, that also means that vagal flexibility isn't there, which means that we can't respond effectively when stress comes along. So stress comes along, and then our recovery time is much shorter. And this is something that we've spent the last 25 years researching, looking at all the medical evidence. And there's now quite strong evidence that this particular process of looking at those inner child beliefs through to emotional patterns, the parts and strategies that come up right through to how it impacts on our nervous and immune system, could then go on to being a risk factor for fatigue, sensitivity syndromes, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, long COVID. Yeah. So this is our new information, the IP that we're generating here, which is that there is a matrix, there is an association with these missing aspects of childhood that the child experiences right through to how it impacts on parts, attachment styles, the nervous and immune system, and the symptoms we may experience. And that lack of safety can come through, once again, that scale of mild neglect through to abuse, through to deep traumatic memories, through to complex trauma, can all impact on our sense of safety in the world around us, and then these particular ways of interacting. And as we're going through this, hopefully it's some light bulbs are going off that, wow, actually, I do notice that particular strategy in me, or I notice that particular attachment style. And that might be related to this inner child belief that's unpredictable, I'm not safe, and I'm going to be abandoned. Okay, let's look at another one here. Emotional attunement. Now, as a child and as a baby, especially in the first 5 years of life, a child wants to feel that the mother or father or both are in tune with their needs, their emotional needs. So when they have an emotion, that these emotions matter. Yeah. And it's okay to have these feelings and emotions, because a child is very vulnerable until the age of 7 or 8, when then it can start looking after itself. So sometimes if there's a lack of emotional attunement, especially with a mother, this can create feelings of, I don't matter. My emotions don't matter. And in fact, emotions are wrong or dangerous. So an emotional pattern that can then occur is, emotional suppression, not wanting to feel emotions, but wanting to numb and dissociate out of them. And that bodily dissociation and numbing is why it's so important to have somatic techniques and what we call somatic retraining as part of healing from our past traumas and experiences, because sometimes it's not just at the cognitive level, it's at the bodily level. And actually, we believe healing happens at many levels: physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and energetic, and somatic. So all of these levels are things that we approach within the Gupta program. So the emotional pattern is emotions are bad because I'm not being attuned to, so I'll numb out and I'll dissociate from those experiences within me. And a life strategy that then, or a part that may be accentuated, is that element of distracting or numbing from day-to-day emotions and day-to-day life, because they just feel too difficult. And then the attachment style, once again, can be anxious attachment. So in relationships, I've got to be hyper vigilant of how the other person is feeling. Are they attuned with how I'm feeling? And then becoming disorganized in the attachment style with that fearful, avoidant push-pull. I really want to be close to this person, but now I'm afraid that I'm not attuned to them. They're not really listening into my emotions. And that is fearful. That is bad. So now I want to avoid a relationship. So there's a push-pull effect. And there can even be that kind of dependency or codependency on really wanting the other person to understand your feelings and help you process them. And this can cause emotional dysregulation and stress reactivity in the nervous system, which can contribute to pain syndrome. So we know that pain, and there's moderate evidence on this, pain is very much related to how we relate ourselves to our emotions. Gut symptoms. Literally, the gut is holding on to these emotions which haven't been attuned to, and for some non-specific fatigue. So I hope as we go through this matrix, there's little light bulbs that may be going off if you notice any of these. And once again, very important you work with a coach or therapist, someone perhaps at the Gupta program, to support you when you recognize some of these. Emotional expression. Now, this one's very interesting. We often are told by a parent or a caregiver or at school, stop being angry, stop being sad, stop crying. And that means the child, Kyle, the inner child, doesn't feel safe in expressing emotions, especially anger. Anger is often the common one that we're not allowed to feel or express. And so the inner child belief can be emotions are bad. I mustn't upset others or they will reject me. Because if I express my emotion as a child, I'm getting told off. I'm being told I'm bad. So emotions are bad in general, especially anger. So the emotional pattern in life that generates is suppressed anger. And then also hypervigilance of other people's moods, because then we start thinking, how is that person feeling? Am I making them angry? Am I making them upset with the things that I'm saying? So we become hypervigilant on other people's moods. So the life strategy that then gets related to this, if emotions are bad, is especially consistent with people pleasing and approval seeking, which is I have these emotions, but I can't express them. So therefore, I must people please. I'm not going to be my authentic self anymore. I'm going to hold myself back and just say what I want other people to hear. So they will approve of me and then won't put me down and put me in danger. So these are survival responses: people pleasing, approval seeking. And another one is the rationalizer, where emotions are bad. I'm told by my mother or father or anyone, the emotions are bad, they're dangerous, they're not to be experienced, they're not to be expressed. And therefore, I'll just use my intellect to rationalize everything around me. And in that way, I then can avoid these difficult emotions. So we can use rationality as a methodology to numb out from these emotions. The attachment styles that then, once again, can be anxious, and there can be codependency in the partner's state, where you're looking to keep tuning in. Have I made them angry? And you start rerunning conversations. Have I hurt them? Which then puts you in a very submissive state. And in that submissive state, that then impacts to create a nervous system which can actually be in that stress response. And we know from the research can actually cause blood pressure issues, muscle tension, and reduced recovery signaling in terms of recovering from stress. So a lot of vascular stress is put on the system when we don't express our emotions. And this is actually in the literature. As I said, we spent years researching thousands of different studies, and also AI now has the ability to churn through the millions of studies out there. And it seems to be pointing to this idea of vascular stress and migraines and pain, blood pressure being impacted on by our inability to feel our emotions, and then essentially fawning, people pleasing. So it's often called fawning, where you fawn. You don't want to be your true self or authentic self. Another missing piece, the inability to handle loss or pain. So as a child, when things don't go our way, there is loss, there is grief as a result of that. Maybe we didn't, as a silly example, get the toy that we wanted, or perhaps there was someone in our lives that was there, but traumatically they passed away. Yeah? And if we aren't taught to grieve, to mourn, to show that I'm upset, this also can be detrimental to our health. The emotional pattern becomes grief and sadness isn't something I'm allowed to experience or feel. And there can be literally a bodily dissociation from our physical body, which then once again gives that idea of the body keeps the score, the very famous book, because the body is holding on to those physical emotions in the energy centers of the body. So where do we feel that energy? Generally, grief and sadness we feel around the throat and chest area. Anxiety and fear we feel in the chest and stomach area. Anger is often associated with the cardiovascular system and also the head, and migraines and headaches. The life strategy can be, once again, distracting and numbing out. And the inner critic can actually be elevated because now that we have this grief and sadness, we're told that we're wrong for having it. There must be something wrong with us. And then we just start becoming the endurer. I won't bother people with it. I've got my pain. I just need to hold on to it and just try and get through life. And the attachment styles can then be this dismissive, avoidant, where, well, I've got this pain that I'm dealing with. A relationship is too much. Let me just feel less anxious out of being in relationships because I've got this grief that I'm holding on to. And in the nervous system, we know that this can cause immune dysregulation. So people who are holding on to grief or who haven't processed a bereavement can actually have a huge amount of dysregulation in the immune system. And we know there's changes in the inflammatory signaling as well, NK cells, inflammation, etc. And it can contribute to depression, immune system changes, and obviously contributing to general inflammatory conditions. And inflammation can be a general risk factor for many different illnesses. And once again, as we go through this, right, it can feel like, gosh, Ashok, you're going through all of this. This is all very depressing. It's just to build awareness so that we can know that through the power of neuroplasticity, we can retrain these old patterns that just came from childhood, right? They're old patterns. And actually, there's a triple whammy. First of all, they're lies that we keep telling ourselves because they were based on a survival strategy from years ago. Yeah. And now we keep thinking that's the same now. So we continue to keep lying to ourselves that this is the way it is right now. And secondly, it then impacts on our health and well-being. And thirdly, it's something which then impacts on our future relationships, our future way of interacting with people. Right? And once again, keeping our nervous and stress systems elevated. Another one here, missing unconditional love and validation. Yeah, now this is obviously a really big one. That a child, as it's growing up, is so vulnerable that it needs that constant attention to feel like it's loved. Because if it's not loved, it could be abandoned. And if a child is abandoned, it cannot survive. So these are deep evolutionary, biological, programmed responses to help us navigate the world around us. So if a child feels that love is conditional on it performing, on it doing well, on it perhaps numbing its emotions, then it starts learning that I'm not good enough just the way I am. I need to perform to actually feel loved and validated. So the belief can be, there's something wrong with me. It's my fault. I'm bad. I can't be authentic. I'm not lovable. Yeah, that fear of rejection, a fear that I'm at my core not lovable. Yeah? And something that I want to mention in a very careful way is that sometimes many of our clients notice that some of their caregivers may have displayed certain narcissistic traits, right through to full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, or they may have displayed borderline traits, borderline personality disorder. And these often are common. And once again, it's not about necessarily having a huge amount of blame. You know, everyone's doing the best that they can. But some of these personality traits from a caregiver or a parent can magnify the chances of some of these beliefs being created. Okay, so it's just something to be aware of. And I've done a whole separate event on borderline and narcissistic traits that can impact on our attachment styles and on our emotional patterns. So what's the emotional pattern that could then occur as thinking there's something wrong with me? It can be shame and guilt. That's the core vibration. That's one of the lowest vibrations that we can experience, is thinking there's constantly something wrong with me, that I'm shamed. Yeah, I'm guilty. I'm not right the way I am. Yeah. And there can be other emotional patterns, insecurity, etc. And the life strategy becomes, actually, let me become my own critic. Because if I put myself down, then it prevents others putting me down, because I will motivate myself through inner criticism. That's the pattern. And that often is reinforced by negative reinforcement, that a child will do better if we put them down. So that inner critic develops in us, like a ghost from our past. We become perfectionist. Yeah? If I do things perfectly, then I will show that I'm worthy of love and validation. If I overachieve, that's also a mask that we wear. And these aren't our authentic self. So these are like little children running around in our unconscious. They're all doing something that is protective, that they think is good for us. But in fact, doesn't mean we're leading an authentic life. We're just leading a life according to these masks and these ego shells. Once again, we don't want to be angry at these parts of us. They're doing the best that they can. And helping and rescuing. If I'm helping and rescuing others, people will love me and validate me. And I'll learn that. So the attachment styles that can become associated with that are anxious attachment, overgiving, and being very sensitive to criticism. Because if we haven't felt validated, then although we're trying to prove ourselves, any little criticism then feels all the more powerful. And in our nervous system and immune system, this can manifest as chronic stress in the nervous system, high allostatic load, and once again, we know from the literature, high levels of inflammatory signaling as well. It can be associated with burnout, low mood, once again, autoimmune symptoms, and fatigue syndromes as well. This is a very core one here. Once again, now that we recognize this, it's recognizing, with this awareness, I can now see why I do the things that I do, why I behave the way that I behave. And at the core of it comes down to working with our parts, healing the critic, the perfectionist, the overachiever. If we heal those parts, it opens up a doorway to then gradually healing even Kyle, the inner child within us. These are all stages. You remember the layers diagram I spoke about? In the Gupta program, we go through those layers. Agency. So this is where a child feels, I have no control. There's no point trying. So if there's a lot of pain they're experiencing, a lot of control, a lot of dominance over a child, they feel they don't have any influence, no agency. So this can manifest as helplessness, feeling the victim, silence, just numbing out. And the life strategy becomes feeling like a victim of life, feeling disempowered. And this can be contributing to dismissive avoidance strategies and a difficulty asserting one's needs. And this is some really interesting data. This often shows up as freeze responses, where a person finds it difficult to navigate day-to-day life. Threat is magnified. And so the whole system just shuts down. So someone can have something happen to them, a stress at work. And because the system is used to this defense strategy, the whole system can shut down. People can go into paralysis as a result of an argument or being put down or a difficulty in life. So this is a really important aspect of our past to recognize and retrain and reprogram. That can cause these burnout patterns very quickly when we feel like we don't have agency, we are disempowered. Finally, just going through our last couple, so missing a sense of belonging. If a child feels it doesn't belong in the family, it feels like it has to cope alone. This is often if another sibling is preferred, or a child is constantly compared to others, or it just doesn't feel like it fits because it's not given that warmth and association in the family and that attention. The emotional pattern can be a sense of loneliness. Even around people, a person can feel lonely in a crowd. And this is often down to this feeling of not feeling a sense of belonging as growing up. The life strategy can be being a loner, avoidance strategy, so anxious avoidance. And we know from the research, this is where we get a huge amount of stress in the nervous system, immune system, and a higher cardiometabolic risk and mortality. So loneliness is is the highest risk factor for all-cause mortality. We know there are higher inflammatory markers and accelerated aging markers as well. So loneliness is something that we want to reducing society from a practical level, so we want people to interact more with people, but also at an internal subjective level, reducing our sense of loneliness, reaching out to others. So if we feel lonely, do we reach our hand out first to support others? And finally, missing that sense of childhood. Sometimes a child has to grow up really fast if their parents are displaying emotional immaturity, or they have a addiction, or another challenge, or they're told to be the man of the household now, or the leader, because the parents are finding it difficult to handle life. This means that child grows up learning that their identity is related to rescuing others, and they can't be their authentic self. That's the inner child belief. So the emotional pattern is over responsibility, and that creates a feeling of resentment, that why can't I be playful and be a child? Why am I having to rescue everybody else? And the life strategy can then be being identified with being the helper and rescue in life, the martyr for others, which then creates, once again, a whole host of different attachment styles. And once again, these are examples. So everything we're going through are examples, and it's not 100% like this. These are just patterns. It's not a science, it's an art. And then in our nervous and immune system, this can create sympathetic activation, poor recovery cycles from stress, and once again, burnout, fatigue, and inflammatory symptoms. And in our model, as those increase, if the protector parts then recognize those as dangerous and our life strategies as dangerous, they can become a vicious cycle. And that's where acute illness can then turn into a chronic illness. And this is part of our trauma protection matrix. So it's a whole matrix of how these childhood needs become missing or ignored, creating these emotional patterns and life strategies, impact on our relationships in terms of our attachment styles, and right through to our nervous and immune system and the symptoms that may occur. Okay, so we've been through a lot of very deep and powerful content there. And what we'd love for you to now do is to please come onto our live Zoom call, where we'll be answering questions about this. I'm sure there are a lot of questions that may come up around this. And once again, we'd like to let you know that we have a webinar series coming up next week, starting very soon. And that's part of this whole Gupta program, which is all about addressing these physical symptoms through going through these layers of parts and protection that are causing a lot of these symptoms in our bodies, right through to inflammatory diseases, long COVID, fibromyalgia, pain. We believe that this matrix now helps us come to a deeper understanding. And so if you want to join us, we have a special discount code for anyone wanting to join in the next week or so. And the discount code is Matrix75. So if you use the discount code Matrix75 at guptaprogram.com, you'll get $75, about 63 euros off the program as our special discount just for the next few days until our new webinar series starts. So I know we've been through a lot of deep content there. I think it's very important that you ground yourself, reach out for support to one of the Gupta program coaches if you need. And once again, the most important thing about this is awareness. We now can recognize some of the patterns that may have been from our past and how it impacts on our current parts of behaviors, and now look to retrain that. And there can be many different pathways and avenues for that. And we hope that you'll join us at our 12-week program on the Gupta program, support you in recognize these layers, engage with the retraining to deepen your health and happiness so that you are now empowered to be your true, authentic self. So our team will now share the Zoom link where we'll go live onto Zoom, and we can answer your questions and go deeper into some of these parts. So thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time on one of our live events. Thanks, everyone. Please do share this. We'll see you next time. Bye.